was born in Granada, in the south of Spain, in the city of the Alhambra. I'm very much marked by this situation of having the Muslim architecture very close all the time. This is also is a very strong part of the city. It's a very strong part of the whole situation in where everybody lives. And what I learned there was that you may be in an atmosphere where you have very different cultures in the same space, in the same city. Even if it was 1959, even if it was during the Franco regime, we learned something like that in a very natural way. I was there until I was 20. My university, my first university was the University of Granada. I started studying there history, well, in fact, geography and history. And it was only when I was in the second or third year in the university studies that I really decided that I wanted to specialize in art history. It was then, maybe because of the Alhambra again, maybe because of all these stimulus in the city, that I really decided that I wanted to go that path. And it was, very suddenly that the whole family moved to Madrid. It was the transition period, the so-called transition period from the dictatorship to the democracy. My father was very much involved in all this process. He was one of the constituyentes. This is one of the members of the parliament that were in the first edition of the parliament that were writing the constitution. And so the whole family moved to Madrid. And then I was overwhelmed by the Prado, by all the, all the art that was available to me at that moment. The university in Madrid, the Universidad Complutense, was a very, very different atmosphere from the one that I left back in Granada. It was very much a challenge. It was a difficult place because it was outside the city. Everything was less friendly than it was in Granada. But I think I took that as a challenge, and I started to think that maybe it could be interesting for me to study the relationship between the state and the art at that time. We have to think that, the context of that time was very much politicized. Everybody was talking all the time about politics. We all were, as young students, we all were very much involved in everything that was happening. And I thought that it could be interesting to explore a little bit general ideas in politics in 20th century art, and how encouraged artists to do their work, or how it discouraged artists to do their work. So I focused on the history of the institutions, on the history of the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofía, all the antecedents, like the Museo de Arte Moderno, Museum of Modern Art, Museum of Contemporary Art, etc. It was really revealing for me, and I think that I'm now, I'm still in that situation. I will go back to what happened between then and between now, but I am now very recently being appointed the Director General of Fine Arts, and my job consists precisely in not studying what happened, but make it happen. So I feel really privileged with all this, the whole situation. So between that idea of writing my doctoral dissertation on the politics of art, and now many things have happened. I have been living in the United States. I have been living in other parts of Spain, in Catalonia, in Girona, especially, also in Barcelona. I have two girls. I traveled a lot. I did many exhibitions. I curated exhibitions for the Reina Sofía and for some other institutions. But I always had this idea of politics behind culture. In fact, I think that the most important feat, I would say, in my career was curating the exhibition Campo Cerrado, which studied the first decade in Franco regime. and how this idea of Franco not having a definite idea of politics for art was simply a lie. There was a lot of ideas implied in everything that happened in the cultural world. So I guess that this is the line that goes from the very beginning to the very end. This idea of art and politics, culture and politics, all the time. At some point, when we moved to the States, when we moved to Washington, D.C., it was 1988. I was in a master's degree in George Washington University with, it was art history and museum training. I had the privilege also to work for the Phillips Collection at the time, which they claimed to be the first museum of modern art some days before the MoMA. Then I have also been working for the Guggenheim Museum for an exhibition called Picasso and the Age of Iron in the 1993, I think, which was also very much involved with politics in the sense that this idea of the Iron Age meant to reveal the political hardnesses of the artists, working in the 30s, at that moment when all the fascisms and totalitarianism were racing in Europe. So, as you see, politics is always there. I started to go on to New York to prepare for this exhibition, Picasso and the Age of Iron, which was curated by Carmen Jiménez and Francisco Calvo Serrayer in the Guggenheim Museum, and where I met also a very influential person for me, which was Dory Ashton. She was a professor in Cooper Union, and she was really a role model for me for all these years. She passed away a few years ago. In fact, she passed away just some months before I received the invitation to go to New York for the King Juan Carlos Chair, the King Juan Carlos Center, which was really a blessing. I mean, we were finishing the preparation for the Campo Cerrado exhibition. Jordana Mendelsohn came for something else, and she came to visit the exhibition. And Joe Lavagny came also to give a lecture related to the exhibition. And both, at some point, both asked me if I was ready to go. Of course, I was ready to go. I was willing to go, dying to go. So, and well, it was like the next fall. It was 2017. Well, I arrived in New York at the beginning of September. I was there until Christmas. And I think that those 4 months were really, really rich. I mean, to me, it was amazing to have the opportunity to have this seminar with these incredibly intelligent, talented, stimulating students. They were all ready to ask really interesting questions. They demanded a lot of attention, and that was really very important for me because I had to really prepare the classes in a way that I had never done before. It was really an interesting, give and take with them. I prepared some part of the class, but the rest was just a give and take, and it was really, really amazing. But also having the opportunity, to go to Bob's library and to have all these huge amount of, resources, and having more than anything else, having the time to do it. Having the possibility to explore whatever is really interesting for you without having all these, obligations that you usually have in the university, like, huge load of classes, which I love teaching, but, if you have less amount of classes, you may have more time for research, meetings or things like that. So it was really, really important. We also had at the King Juan Carlos Center, we also had the opportunity to organize with the incredible help of Laura Turegano and co-chairing this symposium with Miriam Basilio. We had like 2-day symposium that was called Art and Power from Museum to Real World, which was really interesting. We had a cross fertilization with people, coming from poetry, like Luis García Montero, or art history field, or, very, very different visions. And it was really very, very interesting to me. And then you had also these two lectures, one at the beginning and one at the end of the period, which were also very, friendly, very special atmosphere. It was really a very, very nice 4 months in an academic career. I mean, it really is like a turning point. So much so that it made me feel that everything was possible, that you could do whatever you really feel like doing. And when I came back to Madrid, I was proposed to be the director of the new art history department, but I had to go on elections. I mean, I had to be elected by my peers. You know, if they told me before I went to New York, I would have probably said, no, I'm not ready, maybe not the person. But you know, I came feeling very strong. I came back to Madrid feeling really strong. So I went, and of course I started very soon to work as the director of the department. But I learned how to work with people. I learned how to work with administration. I learned how to make everybody participate in a single project. And I think that it was also that who brought me to my current position as the Director of Fine Arts in the Ministry of Culture. In the Ministry of Culture now, as the Director General of Fine Arts, I do have the opportunity to make happen all the things that I was studying beforehand. I mean, it is my responsibility now to take care of the whole Spanish heritage, which is amazingly big. I mean, everything from trying to prevent the expoliation, trying to make more visible the richnesses of the Spanish contemporary art, try to make possible to fund, to give some money to some projects that are ongoing, or to start new projects. So it is really a very interesting moment. And now one of the challenges that we have in front of us is the new law, La Ley de Patrimonio, the new law of Spanish heritage. We have had two previous laws. One was in the Second Republic in the 30s. The other one was in 1985, I mean, with a new socialist government also in power. And now this is going to be like a kind of renewal of the law of 1985, because the whole concept of heritage has broadened in scale. We do have now the concept of landscape. We do have now the concept of audiovisual heritage. So there are many things that were not included in the 1985 law, which was a very progressive law, but it's simply outdated. This is one thing that is a challenge for me that I'm really looking forward. I mean, there's already a draft done of the law that has been consensuated within the ministry and has to go now through all this path, in the parliament, etc. So doing that and being part of that process, it really means a lot. There is also another great challenge that we have to do, is the Estatuto del Artista, the artist. I don't know how to say that. It's like the frame, the normative frame for the artist, who had been without any normative frame until now. We now have to make a lot of effort with some other ministries, like there are many things that are involving the problems with taxation, or other things like protection of the retirement of the artist, things that don't exist right now, and we are trying to do that. So there are many challenges that are really, really interesting in front of us, and that also is very interesting if we think that we are in a very difficult moment. I have here my mask. We are in a moment where it's not easy to travel, to meet people, And of course, we have also a very important, and we're going to have even more important, economical crisis. So maybe it's the moment to do these sort of things that are not especially expensive. It's just something that it means, to rethink all things or to create new possibilities, new structures. It's not about investments. It's about rethinking the whole situation. And it is true. I see that every day, and every time that I had a conversation with a museum director or with an artist, you feel that they are really, looking for help. But I also think that, the culture in Spain, with all the background of from my doctoral dissertation that was at the end of the 80s, so some years have gone by, this has been the same situation always. Even when we were supposed to be rich as a country, the whole situation has been the same, because I think that culture has always been in need of, of protection or of acompañamiento, getting together with the political power. So I think that my main goal now is to make things happen, and to make people in museums, in artists creating their own work, make them feel that they are not alone, make them feel that we are there, that we can. Sometimes support is not only with money. Sometimes support could be with ideas, or could be trying to connect them, trying to make a net where they can work together. So this is now what I'm now working on. But I really think that none of this could have happened if I didn't have the experience of King Juan Carlos Center in New York. I really came back to Madrid, and I mean it, transformed. I felt much stronger, and I think that being the director of the department at the Complutense, which was not easy either at all. Also lack of money, also many problems, also situations that are in a public university in Spain is not easy at all. But going through all this process, I think it made me feel really ready to take this challenge, which is really, as they call in Spain, un toro de Miura. It's something very difficult to really control or dominate. The whole situation, the rhythm is very, very quick. You have many things in the same day, but you really have the feeling that you really can do things. First of all, map the problems and try to assess what are your real possibilities. But if I can only be part of the process of the new heritage law and with the new Estatuto del Artista, it will be, to me, I think it will be more than enough. What we would like to do is to put our work before the work of art, not after the work of art, to make the work of art happen, to help artists produce, to help artists, investigate, to help artists make their own research, instead of making more and more exhibition spaces, which I think that we have really a lot in the city of Madrid and in the space of Madrid. And also, very important, and we really have to consider that all the time, the Ministry of Culture is not Madrid, it's Spain. So that's why it is so important for me to make this space as a place, as a melting pot for all coming artists coming from Catalonia or from Andalusia or from Galicia or from Valencia should meet there, work there together, but also having their own spaces and try to make like a little artist community. In fact, it sounds like a very new idea, but it's a very traditional idea, very traditional. It's like La Rouche in Paris, or at the beginning of 20th century, or it's like the academies in Rome. But I would like to do that also open to society, not as close as those places were. This is something that could be, I don't know, a reality in a few years. This is not a present thing, but I think it's also good to think, in years ahead. I don't know if I would see that. Maybe it's more sensible to think that I would be part of the heritage law and the Estatuto del Artista also. And then the other thing could be, started, and then we will see. But again, all the strength that I brought from New York is what made me do this. It was really a transforming experience for me. The whole idea of being, part of this very amazing institution, the whole idea of having the possibility of talking with very interesting professors all the time, all the colleagues in New York, and and the idea of being able to also to talk with students that were, coming from all over the world with very different experiences, with very different backgrounds, that make you rethink your whole idea of class, your whole idea of the contents of the syllabus that you were saying, that you were supposed to be following. It really makes you think, it really makes you feel strong, it really makes you feel happy. And the seminar was very much based on the experience of the exhibition Campo Cerrado. But I wanted to start with the exhibition, to start with the Spanish example of art and dictatorships, but also having in mind that the students were coming from, elsewhere, and they didn't have to be aware necessarily of what happened in Spain. We had the Spanish experience as an example, but we had to open it as many other examples of art and dictatorships in the world could be, interesting for the students. So I think it was in fact art and dictatorships was the general title, and it was also a very specific moment in the American politics. Everybody in New York was also very much, politicized again, because it was the first years of the Trump era. Museums were also doing very politicized exhibitions. Everybody was very much, aware of that situation. And the students there were also coming from different places of the world that had their own examples of dictatorships, like China, or like Russia, or like Venezuela, or like many other places. And it was, very enriching, because we had so much in common, but so also different nuances that could, be rich and considering. And also, it was very interesting to me. One of the themes that was, crossing the whole seminar was memory. What to remember, what to forget, how to remember things, how to forget things. And it was very important to consider the example of the Valle de los Caídos, the Valley of the Fallen in Spain. But also it was very interesting for me how that was also evoking things for American students. Things, for instance, lynching in the states of the South. How was that supposed to be remembered? How was that supposed to be commemorated as something to be forgotten, as something to be remembered, as something that has to be contextualized? All these things were really on the top of the table at the seminar, and it was really, really, really. I mean, I learned. I think that I learned much more than my students. I have collaborated many times with professors in art history at NYU, especially at the Institute of Fine Arts. Professors like Robert Lubar, I have done a lot of things with him. I really adore him, and we were the co-directors of a seminar some years ago at the Institute that was called Transatlantic Dialogues. We were trying to compare artistic practices, like in curating, in art history, in museum directing, in many other sectors in the art and cultural departments. And I have also had some very nice relationship with Professor Jonathan Brown, who is also a very beloved personality here at the Prado Museum. I'm also part of the Prado Museum Board of Trustees since some years ago, and of course the whole tradition of the history of Spanish art at NYU has always been very much appreciated. Also, Professor Sullivan has been very, very influential to all of us. So, and I think that the whole NYU institution, but very specifically those professors in the Institute of Fine Arts at very specific moments, they did a tremendous amount of work for the art history of Spain in the United States. Also, at Washington Square, at the other side, Miriam Basilio, Jim Fernandez, Joe Lavagni, they had done a tremendous work for this new consideration of Spanish 20th century art, 20th century culture, 20th century social culture of art. In fact, in a way that could not be done in Spain. This is also something that was very important for me. I felt much freer to talk about what happened with Spanish culture in the 40s in New York than in Madrid. And not only because I was away, not only because in Spain it's still very difficult to talk about Francoism. It's still very difficult. But also because, you know, having Joe Lavagni, having Miriam Basilio, having Jim Fernandez around, you know, made me aware of many other things that could be studied, that could be analyzed, that could be done, that could be said. So yes, it was a transforming experience for me in many ways. Okay, the first lecture was about the perception of Spanish art in America. And I tried to make like a very quick path from what happened at the end of 19th century and how everything was changing, was evolving through 20th century. How, you know, at the moment when American collectors were really eager to come to Spain and take hold of Spanish possessions, Spain was supposed to be like a very exotic country that was very much in decadence, and how all this started to change when artists like Picasso or like Miro were at the center, not at the periphery, not in the decadent side of the art history, but at the center. Also, Picasso and Miro were very important in that change of perception because they had a very important political meaning for modern art. They were not only uncompromising in artistic terms, but they were also uncompromising in political terms. And that was having Guernica, the huge painting by Picasso, which is now at the Reina Sofia, but having it at the Museum of Modern Art for decades was, I think, that had not only an artistic value, but also an ethical value for American artists. So that was somehow the focus. And then that's why I choose to monographically talk about the presence of Guernica in New York for the closing lecture. Because there were a lot of layers that could be explored, how it really influenced the way artists in the abstract expressionist movement considered the relationship between art and politics, and how they could really have something to say socially, not only artistically, in New York context of the time. So one was more general, the artistic perception of Spanish art in New York or in America, and the last one was very specific about Guernica in New York. In the middle of this semester, we had, I think it was in November, we have this symposium that I co-chaired with Professor Miriam Basilio that was called Art and Power from Museum to Real World. We invited to that symposium artists, poets, curators, coming from Madrid, coming from New York, coming from many other places, coming from Barcelona, trying to have different perspectives of this idea of how museums that were always have been, very often considered a closed space. Museums were supposed to be a closed institution, like a bubble within the culture, because they enclose and things from different places, different times. But on the contrary, we thought that museums could be considered to be open to the real world. And in fact, the moment in New York when this symposium took place in November 2017, museums were really open to what was happening in culture and in politics at the time. Museums had the moral duty to say things. Museums have the moral duty to really send messages and to take a position, to take a stake. So, well, we had this general idea that was somehow addressed from different point of view, from poetry or writing, from curating, which is also narrating in a specific place, like the space of an exhibition. That was the case of the curator of the exhibition. We wanted a revolution, black women in America, that took place in the Brooklyn, in the Museum of Brooklyn. I also had my contribution on the Campo Cerrado exhibition and the meaning of that exhibition in Spain in 2016. Miriam Basilio was also talking about this image of the kings and queen of the royal family in art and how it was depoliticized and somehow devoid of political meaning when it was done in places like magazines, like Hola magazines and things like that, putting it in pop culture. So it was a very different, the theme was addressed from very different perspectives, and I think it was really interesting. And what was also interesting was the number of questions, the number of conversations that arose in this whole context. When I came to this position in the Ministry of Culture, in the Dirección General de Bellas Artes, I had the feeling that everybody in the ministry know a lot about the proceedings, know a lot about how everything has to be solved. I come from the university, I have a different perspective. Sometimes I have the feeling that politics thinks, very rightly so, that academics like me, we tend to think, but we are not able to act. We tend to point, the problems, but we don't know how to solve the problems. But on the other hand, I also have the feeling that this time they call me precisely because I was not a politic. They call me because I have this intersection with real cultural world. Because I've been curating exhibitions in different museums, because I'm part of the university, because I have direct relationship with artists. So sometimes, it's very good to come from a different world. It's very good to come from a different, from a different sector and not having politics as your main job. In fact, that gives me a lot of freedom because I know that my real place is in the university. I know that if I am now into the Ministry of Culture, my moral duty is to do what I have to do. I'm not there because I want to make a career in politics. So if at some point there is something that I don't agree, that it's morally violent to me or something like that, I don't have to stay. I can go back to my place. This is more a strength than a weakness. I mean, you don't really need to be a politician to do things. So I really think that gives me a lot of freedom. And while I'm there, I have to be there because I feel that I can do things.